Let's start with our next talk. Last one before the break. We have Allyn Stott here with us. He's a staff engineer at Airbnb, and he's going to talk about metrics and how we measure the wrong things, and we base our decision and our AI learning models on the wrong data, and then we take the wrong decisions, and then we pile up on that, and it's all a huge mess, and we need Allyn to clear this up for us. Please welcome Allyn Stott.
Thank you very much. I have made a lot of mistakes in my life, but particularly when it comes to metrics. This is the talk I had wished I'd seen. My story with metrics starts on a Monday morning. I'm only a few months into a new job, and I get this message from my boss. He wants updated board of director metrics. So I sent a message to my new team. Hey, what have we presented in the past? And what's the response? Yes, bad news. Last manager just made those up. Good news, I'm going to do so much better. How many of you have inherited someone else's metrics mess? Yes, yes. This is often our starting point. So I did what you probably did, and I Googled it, and that's led me to using a lot of bad metrics. But so what? Why should we care about metrics? Well, one reason might be that metrics drive improvements. Carl Pearson, he's credited as being the founder of modern statistics. He's got this famous quote, "That which is measured improves," which at first sounds like a really great plug for metrics, but there's an implied warning in that message. What if you're measuring the wrong thing? There's a paper written by these guys out of MIT, Hauser and Katz. It's called Metrics, You Are What You Measure. And they talk about how the metrics you choose will improve. And over time, you'll become what you measure. Edward Tufte, he teaches this incredible course about presenting data. He says that metrics reveal data. Metrics are a tool that enable us to present the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time with the least ink in the smallest space. And why? Well, let's be honest. We need a budget. We need headcount. And metrics are usually the tool that we use to communicate that. So why are making metrics so difficult? Well, in my personal experience, metrics are difficult because I'm an engineer. I don't care about metrics. Here's a much less famous quote. Metrics are an annoying PowerPoint I need to update every month. That's from me. A bit about me. I'm a senior staff engineer at Airbnb. I work on fun things like enterprise security, threat detection, and incident response. I live in Austin, Texas with my wife and 3-year-old son, Liam. And there's one thing I'm really good at as a dad, as a security engineer. I'm really good at making mistakes. And this is the point of the talk where I'm supposed to tell you about my accolades, my last 15 years of experience, gain some credibility with you. But instead, I'm going to tell you about my mistakes. And the first terrible mistake I've made is losing sight of the goal. How many of you work the alert queue? I see no hands. Anybody here work the alert queue? They were triaging alerts. Okay, yes. Couple hands. So those are the tired people in the room. And when we spend our days triaging alerts and responding to fires, it can be really easy to lose sight of the goal. And so we end up describing that work with metrics like this one. And here's a metric that shows the number of security alerts per month. You've seen this metric. You probably have this metric today. And if we take a closer look, we'll see that in the past year, March and April had the most alerts. And if we keep looking, the alerts are generally trending down. Did we do that? Did we stop logging something? Did I just get mad at the IPSs and just turn those off? Alert count has become the heartbeat metric for security operations. Instead of rooting back to our goals, we've reduced ourselves to cries for help. I've come to call this metric the operational burden we've inflicted on ourselves. Another title might be, We're doing things. It's crazy out there. And sometimes we try to make it a bit better. We break it down by true and false positives. I've been proud of myself for doing this. But if I'm honest, I don't know what I was trying to say with this metric. That we have a lot of false positives? My problem is that I don't know where to start with metrics. Detection and response has significantly matured as a field, but I'm stuck here making metrics about alert volume. So I need a better starting point. And so I thought about what in detection and response could we measure to help us make decisions to see if we're improving. And you can remember these by the acronym SAVER. We want to show that we're streamlining our operations by improving our efficiency and accuracy through automation. We want to raise awareness about what we've learned from threat intel, sharing things like threats and trends. We want to measure our vigilance. How prepared are we for those top threats? Can we detect them? And as we learn about new threats and trends, how is that guiding our threat hunts? As we make our explorations through the networks, what are we finding? And when our detections fire, or our threat hunts turn into incidents, what's our readiness? How quickly are we able to organize and respond to incidents? How complete are the playbooks we have? So when you're thinking about your own metrics, think about which category it should fall under. And this can help you tie it back to the outcome. And then for each metric you make, you should ask, what question does your metric answer? So for this metric, I think we were trying to answer, how much time are we spending on false positives? And how do I control this metric? How do I reduce false positives? Alert tuning? How's that going for everyone? It's not going well for me. I have two big problems with this metric. First, this metric doesn't tell us where we're spending our time, really, believe it or not. And second, the only control we have is alert tuning. So let's make it better. And here's a graph of time spent on false positives. And instead of tracking how many false positives there are, I'm tracking how much time is spent on them. How much time you spend working on an alert manually, you could measure simply by measuring the time that the alert's assigned to when it's marked as a false positive. But if you're like my team, we get in the queue and we see all the alerts and we just assign them to ourselves. Done. SLA met. So when you make a metric, think about how are the smart people on my team going to hack this metric? So how do we improve this metric? So what about automation? And as we get more automation tools, the number of events might not even equate to how much time we're spending on false positives. And what's cool about tracking it this way is that as you move things to automation, you can track how many human hours you're saving. And now you're not just incentivized to tune your alerts, but you're incentivized to find where am I actually spending the most manual time? How can I automate it? Second mistake. Second mistake is using quantities that lack controls, or simply said, measuring the things I can't change. So this is a classic metric. It'll be in your Google search. And in this, you can see that the times for recovery really peaked in December. And you might try to dive into that, or you might just go, that's when the holidays are. But my big problem with this metric is actually that incidents have a lot of variability, especially the further downstream you get in the response process. A lot of things you, specifically your team, can't control. And so a graph like this, it doesn't help me make any decisions. And so I'll stop caring about this. So instead, I've broken out response time across all the phases. And here I've done something that I've started doing. I've started filtering out all of that built-in time I need that I know for each type of playbook I need for quality. Eric Brandwine, he gives this really great talk called The Tension Between Absolutes and Ambiguity in Security. And in it he says, when you look at a metric, it should say, what do you want from me? Like it should tell me, what do you want from me? And one of the easiest ways to do that is to make the answer 0. So if everything's firing exactly how long you expect it to, make it 0. There's nothing to do. This way you know exactly where in the phases for which incidents to go to and look to make improvements. Mistake number 3, thinking proxy metrics are bad, or more simply, creating amazing metrics that are insanely expensive. And this one's come into quite some popularity over the years. And I've seen teams spend a lot of resources doing this, creating this. And I've seen years go into developing technique testing, looking to test across all of the different platforms, Mac, Linux, Windows, and then your cloud platforms. And I've seen teams spend years developing tests, investing in tooling, when really, the question they really just wanted to answer was, where do I prioritize my detection building? So do this instead. Rather than trying to measure your detection coverage across the entire attack matrix, start by finding the top 5 threats you care about the most. And don't overthink it. Look at your external threat intel and think about the industry you're working in and what type of environment you have. And then look at your incident trends. What are your organization's biggest security risks? Or a really great way to ask this is, what would be a really bad day for your company? If data was exfiltrated from your company, what data would make your chief privacy officer cry the most? That's a great metric, by the way. You can visualize it with a tear. And then once you have your top 5, prioritize your detection development from there. I like to workshop these as a team. We'll take each of the top 5 threats and then derive, using attack, all the different techniques and sub-techniques. And as you write your tests and detections, you'll slowly, over time, build yourself a prioritized MITRE attack coverage map, but without that super upfront costly metric. And plus, now you might be best friends with your chief privacy officer. Mistake number 4, not adjusting to the altitude. And as someone that's floated back and forth between management and individual contributor, I'm guilty of this one. How many of you have ever tried to explain the MITRE attack framework to a board of directors? Yes, the brave ones are in the room. And I say, why not? I actually think detection coverage and MITRE attack are some of the best new metrics we've come up with. But wow, we've done a really bad job of explaining it at the leadership level. We need metrics at every altitude. The higher the altitude, the less it becomes about the detection and response, and the more it's about how it impacts the business. It's helpful for me to think about it like a pyramid. For the business, the impact we make is reducing the cost of an incident or breach. Or another way to think about it is, how costly can we make it for an attacker to cause impact? And so our metrics at the top of the pyramid drive our North Star. This is the final outcome we're looking to drive. And then under that top layer is our coverage and effectiveness, and then under there, how well our tools perform. And if you organize your metrics in a pyramid, it can help you connect those lower layers back up to those North Star top metrics. And that helps you speak at the correct altitude for your audience. Organizing your metrics in a pyramid can also help you connect your metrics with the rest of the security organization. It turns out detection and response is not always the best strategy. If your metrics show that your mean time to respond is trending down because of a repeating incident, sometimes the best way to reduce that cost isn't to try to shoot to improve that streamlined or readiness metric. It's going to the other team and saying, hey, we need to put a new control in place to prevent this type of incident. Mistake number 5, asking why instead of how. And my natural inclination is to ask why. And as a dad, I have a lot of why questions. Why did we bring the car seat when we only took 1 taxi ride the entire trip? Why do we need 4 suitcases? Why didn't we bring a stroller? And why can't Liam walk by himself? But in all of these examples, why is not helping. So instead, I've learned to move straight to the how and start figuring out what needs to actually be done. And often, answering how allows us to identify the underlying problem much faster and from a much more positive perspective, especially from your partner, coworker. How can I carry Liam, a car seat, and 2 suitcases through the airport? How can we detect these type of threats sooner? How can we respond faster? When I interviewed with my current VP, she asked me, so how do we build a modern detection and response program? Great question. And then I answered it in 2 minutes. Just kidding. It made me think about maturity models. And my first exposure to maturity models was the hunting maturity model, HMM, which came from David Bianco in 2015. And HMM was really helpful at describing the maturity of threat hunting and what we needed to do to get to that next level of maturity. Maturity models are actually a really useful tool. They give us, as security practitioners, this common language to answer, where are we now? What tools and processes do we have today? Where are we going? Where do we want to be by next year? And how do we get there? What are our objectives and how do we achieve those? So I created the threat detection and response maturity model. And the TDR maturity model builds off of HMM and then expands it across all the different areas of detection and response. And there's a lot to it. So at the end, I'll give you a link that'll provide you access to the full maturity model. And the first pillar I thought about when measuring the maturity of a TDR program was observability, or having the visibility, context, and then quickly. And then proactive threat detection, where we focus on collecting threat intel so we can prioritize the detections we build and buy and the hunts we perform. And then finally, rapid response, where we prepare with playbooks and automations for game day. And we use these pillars and these 14 capabilities to describe and measure where we are today and where we want to go next. And so for each of these 14 capabilities in the framework, you'll score 4 different areas: process, tools, documentation, and testing. And then you'll rate them all the way from initial to leading. And I've provided general guidance here in the slides, but within the framework itself, there's even more specific direction for each capability. So for example, if we rate our detection engine capability, we can think about the processes we have. Do we have a process for creating a detection? How does it look for first-time occurrences? Is that the most optimal way? And then we rate the tools we have. Can we do that today with our tools? And then documentation, or the lack thereof at my place. And then there's testing. How do you validate and know that the logic you have to build those type of detections is working? And then once you've rated your capabilities, then you can visualize it. And here's an example of how you can take your ratings and show at a high level where you are today across those 3 pillars, and where you plan to be by the end of the year based on the projects you've planned. And I like using this tool because of the simplicity of the message, while it has all that underlying detail about where you are with each of your capabilities. But I also like to use it because it shows if the work that we're doing is actually having any impact to our maturity. So as you do the work, you'll need metrics to show that you're getting better. So that's where the SAVER framework comes in. And for each metric you create, you'll put it into this structure here. You want to avoid my first mistake, losing sight of the goal, and ask, what question does this metric answer? What's the outcome we're looking to achieve? And then use the SAVER categories to help you tie it back to your outcome. You want to avoid my second mistake, quantities that lack controls. Make sure it's a metric you can actually control. And don't forget, make it 0 so that you can filter out what you can't control today. And then if you have control of a metric, what risks could this measurement reward? Are your SLA metrics causing your team to hack your queue triage processes? They might not be bad metrics, but you might want to create metrics that help balance it out. Because remember, you become what you measure. And then there's metric expiration. Now that we have so many automation tools and we're not manually working things, maybe it's time to expire alert count metrics. And then data effort and time requirements, or the cost. Please don't come away from this talk saying, Allyn told me to spend all my time on metrics. First of all, you won't be popular, and I don't want that coming back to me at all. So thank you. But that was not the end. That was a test to see if you're paying attention. Don't spend all your time on metrics. Remember my third mistake where I thought I could test the entire attack framework. It looks cool, but you might not need to. So anytime I talk about metrics, I always get asked, so how do I change the bad metrics I'm already presenting today? And here I've convinced my friend Dexter to get into near freezing water. We're still friends. Dexter's first reaction was shock. His heart rate spiked. When his body hit the water, he gasped. Liam thought it was great. But then suddenly, Dexter focused on his breathing, and he had clarity. And it's the same when you change your metrics. It's not going to be fun immediately. You're going to go into a state of shock. Other people who you've been updating that PowerPoint slide forever are going to go into shock, especially if they've seen those bad metrics for a while. But my tip is to embrace it. Push through the change, and you will soon have much more clarity on how your program is operating. So let's bring it all together. Up front and center is our maturity using the TDR maturity model. And then we use the saver categories to tell the story of our program. We're streamlining our operation by looking at what's taking the most time and automating it. We look at our threat intel and incident trends. We're raising our awareness about these top 5 threats to the company. We focus this quarter, to build detections for these 3 threats, and here's where we're tracking. And we're exploring gaps in security controls relevant to the top 5 threats, and we found these 3 new gaps. And from a readiness perspective, we have a repeating incident with a really long recovery time, so we're working with our enterprise security team to implement new controls. So now, as you develop your own metrics, you have the TDR maturity model to measure your capabilities, the Sabre framework to measure what matters, and a way to prioritize your detection development. This is hopefully a wake-up call. Take the cold plunge. It's time to rethink your detection and response metrics. Thank you very much. And then real quick, this is my link tree. It has the link to these slides, the TDR maturity model. I also write a very infrequent newsletter that has an adorable, cute cat, and the security info is decent.
Thank you, Allyn. That was very interesting, particularly for me. I hope for the audience as well. Do we have questions in the room? I don't see any coming questions. I'll have one, the general one. I'm not really working with too much with monitoring people, but I work with people running services, and then they have the logs, and then they come up with a dashboard. And there is a very strong tendency to display anything that they can see. Yes. Like, I always go, it's ready data versus actionable data.
Yes.
And they repeat, and the term metaphor I'm using is, you're reporting the number of raindrops blocked by your roof per roof tile per week. And who cares? What I'm interested in my roof is the leaks.
Yes.
But how do you approach this problem?
Yeah.
How do you explain to people, look, just because we have the data doesn't mean that we have to report it.
Yes. One of the first pieces of advice I give people when they start out with the framework is I've laid out these major categories for things that we care about. Start with one metric in each area, one thing you're focused on. Our metrics that we present should frequently change. If I'm presenting the same metric for 6 months, that story is probably getting old and boring, and it's why are we still focused on this problem? You have a lot of underlying metrics that help you choose what's the thing we should care about the most. That's when you're looking at, okay, we're seeing this type of threat. How long is it taking us to respond to it? Could we detect it sooner? And thinking about those things, but then bubbling up the one that you want to work on. This is the thing that matters the most, and that's what you want to present. You want to present the one thing that you're actually working on right now, that you expect the next time you present it, in a month, in 2 months, that things will have changed. Otherwise, you're going to present a whole bunch of things, and there's no narrative to that story, and the business can't follow, and people don't know where to focus them.
Okay, thanks. More questions? Everyone who wants to go to coffee break.
That's right.
Okay.
There's one in the back there.
Oh, I overlooked that. It's the light. Yes, we have a question up there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Great speech. I'm curious about, you mentioned you're filtering for what you're not able to control. And so how do you deal with interfaces where you're relying on others and you might actually want to show what's working well and what isn't? Is there something that you would consider including in your metric selection?
So if you have an expectation with another team, another service, about how long something should take, that's actually a good use case for the SLAs to that interface. So saying, hey, if I need to remove a system from the network, and that's something that goes to my network team, and it's not something I can do, working with that team on that playbook and saying, hey, here's the SLA we're going to discuss to talk about how long it should take. And then you could start working on looking at the things that are outside your control, building an SLA or determining how long that team expects it, and then using that to filter out. And then if you can actually categorize those external interfaces, even internal ones, and say, here's the ones that are in a bucket that are of an acceptable time frame. We're good with these time frames. These are the ones that we're really not happy with, and thinking about how do we make improvements either with that interface, or how do we internally improve our processes or tools to do that? Yeah.
Good.
Cool, thank you.
Good. If there is no more questions, I don't see any hands raised. Oh, there is one. Yeah. Okay. He's standing between you and the coffee break.
That's right.
Yeah, I was late for the talk, but as far as I could tell, it was great. How do you handle like management level people who are used to a more storytelling-based metrics like, oh yeah, we send out questionnaires to dev teams and they do a self-declaration, yada yada, versus you migrate to real metrics. So, I mean, those guys will be very unhappy at first because reality clashes with questionnaires.
There's always a period in my career at every job where the metrics that preceded me either have to be completely changed because I can't retell that same story because it was a lie. And that's usually a good approach, is to say, hey, we're going to slowly move away from these metrics, and there's a new story now, so we're going to tell a new story, because you can't retell this old story that was full of lies, and that's really hard to go back and say, hey, I know we presented these metrics in the past, none of them are factual. So starting with a new story or slowly shifting that story, I think, is the easiest way to go about it. The other way that I like to do is just delete the old one and just say, sorry, they're gone. The other way is to just really bad math the last guy. Don't do that one, though. That's never popular.
Very good. Thank you very much,
Thank you very
Allyn.
much.
Here's some chocolate for you and your family. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.